The last few hours have turned into a political earthquake, and everything points to a truth that Trump is trying to hide at all costs. He is losing control. It's not just pressure, it's not just investigation, it's pure desperation. US intelligence is sounding the alarm, allies are jumping ship, and even fundraising has become public humiliation. And now comes the very news Trump feared the most, and that could change everything. Want to understand the magnitude of this bombshell? Then hold on, because this is just the beginning. Before revealing these bombshells, subscribe to the channel and leave your like.
As Donald Trump's situation worsens, an intelligence leader breaks the silence with a call that could change everything. What's happening now in the United States is not just another turbulent chapter of American politics, it's a turning point that exposes the rottenness at the core of Donald Trump's legacy. Authoritarianism, institutionalized corruption, and outright disregard for the Constitution. And when we hear a congressman like Jason Crow clearly saying, "We are taking names," this is not rhetoric, not exaggeration, and not an empty threat. It's a warning, a necessary warning after years of abuse, chaos, and illegality carried out under a government that treated the Constitution like a scrap of paper. Crow speaks of accountability because he knows Trump created a culture of impunity within agencies like ICE and DHS, turning them into instruments of persecution, fear, and brutality against entire communities. And this machine of oppression only worked so well because Trump fueled it with his hateful rhetoric, encouraging agents to act like political militias rather than public servants. This is not interpretation. It's documented in reports from the ACLU, Human Rights Watch, and even leaked internal testimonies from agents who warned of illegal orders coming from above. And when Democrats like Crow say they're going to investigate everything, they are talking about a long list. Illegal deportations, arbitrary arrests, family separations, inhumane detention centers, and warrantless operations, all while Trump pretended to be a defender of the law. But the conversation goes further. Crow makes it clear that the fight also concerns war powers, another area where Trump tried to act as a monarch. When he publicly flirted with military action against Venezuela, ignoring Congress and suggesting he might defy judicial decisions, he showed exactly the danger of an executive who does not believe in limits. Crow knows this and insists that Congress reclaim its role, because without oversight, Trump, or any other aspiring authoritarian, simply moves forward. The congressman speaks with the frustration of someone who has seen firsthand the dirty game, using old military authorizations as blank checks to justify interventions, undermining the balance of powers that sustains American democracy. And here is the point that most exposes Trumpism, the total lack of respect for the rule of law. When Crow says that if the president ignores the law, we cut the money, he is referring to one of the most powerful tools we have to contain autocratic leaders. This is not exaggeration. Independent agencies have already warned that Trump pressured the Pentagon to make decisions outside constitutional parameters and tried to manipulate the armed forces for his personal interests. That's exactly why Crow emphasizes strategy, pressure, and mobilization, because goodwill has never defeated authoritarianism. Pressure has. And as Crow exposes this reality, he also highlights something crucial. The Republican Party is splitting, not because of morality, but because of internal chaos, incompetence, and fear of consequences. Trump turned the GOP into a cult operating by intimidation, not principles. Many Republicans know Trump is dragging them into a hole, but they lack the courage to confront him. Crow sees these cracks, and that's why he talks about doubling, tripling, quadrupling the pressure. He understands how Washington works, not through altruism, but through political strength. When he speaks of recruiting the next generation of leaders, he's describing exactly what the progressive movement has been trying to build: a political force willing to confront extremists, not negotiate with them. Recent elections have shown this. Pro-democracy candidates won in multiple states, driven by an electorate tired of Trumpian chaos and genuinely concerned about armed extremism growing in the shadow of MAGA rhetoric. Organizations like Midas Touch, Move On, and Indivisible have documented this phenomenon, a growing rejection of far-right authoritarianism. All of this conversation culminates in a crucial point: accountability. Crow says clearly, document everything, record everything, note plates, write down names. This echoes what the J6 committee already demonstrated. Much of the evidence that brought down the criminals involved in the Capitol attack came from ordinary citizens, online investigators, communities that refused to normalize fascism. The message is simple: democracy does not defend itself. And perhaps the strongest part of this is Crow's view of how societies heal. There is no healing without truth, no reconciliation without justice. After what Trump did, from the Capitol attack to abuses against immigrants, from coup attempts to attacks on the judiciary, the United States must confront this truth head-on, without fear, without relativism. What is striking is how, as Jason Crow explains the need for accountability, the shadow of Trumpism appears in every example. Nothing, absolutely nothing being discussed here came out of nowhere. This institutional crisis has a name, a face, and a history: Donald Trump. I say this plainly because my audience knows exactly what I mean. Trump didn't just abuse ICE and DHS. He transformed these agencies into extensions of his project of fear and division. He encouraged agents to ignore legal limits, portrayed immigrants as internal enemies, and legitimized actions that violate basic human rights. We talk about abuses as if they were isolated incidents, but they weren't. They were instigated by the president himself, who glorified brute force and demonized oversight.
This becomes even clearer when Crow talks about war. Honestly, if there is anything more dangerous than Trump with domestic police power, it's Trump with military power abroad. A man who does not read full reports, idolizes authoritarian leaders, and views international conflicts as opportunities for self-promotion should not be near military decisions. And when the congressman mentions Venezuela, I immediately recall how Trump implied, almost celebrated, the idea of military intervention, as if human suffering were a chessboard. Independent think tanks and analyses by experts like Larry Diamond and Fiona Hill have shown that Trump repeatedly pressured advisors for risky military actions, ignoring strategic advice, and trying to use the armed forces for political gain. This is not strength, this is irresponsibility. This is what autocrats do. When Crow says Congress must reclaim its powers, I cannot help but think of how much we've lost in these years. Trump tried to govern as if he owned the country, not led it. He attacked judges, tried to manipulate investigations, pressured the military, threatened state leaders, and destroyed any sense of institutional stability. Who pays the price? The people. Vulnerable communities, immigrants, minorities, workers he claimed to defend, but sacrificed while protecting billionaires and corporations. I fully agree with Crow when he says we cannot trust Republicans to do the right thing. And I'll say more, many of them don't want to do the right thing. They know that if they break with Trump, the radical base destroys them politically. This is what happens when a party surrenders to extremism. It becomes hostage to the very monster it created. That is why Crow talks about pressure. He understands that morality doesn't work with this group. Only pressure works. Political pressure, public pressure, electoral pressure. Because if you rely on their conscience, nothing remains. Meanwhile, we see Trumpism trying to infiltrate every area of government, as warned by people like Chris Goldsmith, who has years of experience confronting extremists. When Goldsmith talks about radicalized groups entering the federal government, this is not conspiracy theory. This is reality. We have evidence, independent investigations, internal complaints. Trump opened the door to extremists, conspiracy theorists, white supremacists, and opportunists of all kinds. And now removing these people from power requires real political courage. Crow hits the mark when he says we must stop thinking regime change is the solution. Trump wanted to pour gasoline on international conflicts without understanding the consequences. And that puts lives at risk, wastes resources, and destroys international credibility. My audience remembers well. Trump praised dictators, attacked historical allies, threatened countries without clear strategy, and acted as if diplomacy were a reality show. And when a leader like this suggests he can ignore judicial rulings, the Constitution, legal limits, this is not exaggeration. This is a direct threat to democracy. The part that impressed me most in this conversation is when Crow talks about documenting abuses. He's not asking for anything new. He's asking for what has already saved this country from greater tragedies. That's how it was in J6, when ordinary citizens identified domestic terrorists. That's how it was when civil rights groups revealed ICE abuses. That's how it was when independent journalists exposed corruption within the federal machine. Civil society's power is real, and Trump has always feared that power because he cannot control it. I say, with full conviction, accountability is not revenge. It's not political persecution, it's the minimum. It's the reconstruction of what Trump tried to destroy. Without accountability, we open the door for another extremist, perhaps smarter, to repeat and improve on the same abuses. The truth is, Trump turned personal loyalty into a criterion for public office.
He fired those who disagreed, attacked those who investigated, destroyed the careers of serious civil servants, and put loyal incompetents in their place. This is not governance, this is a cult. When Crow says no country emerges from such a crisis without truth, justice, and reconciliation, he points exactly to the path we need to follow. But reconciliation cannot come before truth. Forgiveness cannot come before justice. Healing cannot come before wounds are exposed. And the greatest wound in this country has a name: Donald Trump. And healing will not come as long as his abuses go unpunished. The final lesson from this conversation is clear. Democracy does not defend itself. It requires vigilance, participation, courage, and above all, people willing to not forget. Because Trump relied and still relies on forgetfulness. But Crow is right. We are taking names and we will not let this go.
Desperate and out of options, Trump, the corrupt, now begs for money to save a collapsing empire. When we look at the economic chaos laid bare by the latest Treasury data, it's impossible to ignore the obvious. Trump has absolutely no understanding of economics. And worse, he acts as if the United States were his private casino, where he can gamble, lose, and simply pretend everything is fine. But now, with the updates finally released after the government shutdown, the world is seeing unfiltered how recklessly, impulsively, and dangerously amateurishly the American economy is being managed. And yes, this is making allies uncomfortable, investors nervous, and the government machinery itself on high alert. Every time Trump tries to pose as an economic genius, the numbers come in to put him in his place. The new capital flows show this clearly. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Japan, and even the Cayman Islands, which Trump loves to pretend are loyal investors, are holding the American economy by the throat, and not because they trust the US, but because the Trump administration turned American debt into a ticking time bomb, and they know they have enough leverage to manipulate the game. Reuters has repeatedly reported how central banks have been reducing U.S. debt purchases, and now Treasury analyses confirm the trend. This isn't an accident. It's a direct effect of Trumpian chaos. And here's something Trump would never admit. The Treasury is in a bind, trying to finance deficits created by his obsession with cutting taxes for billionaires, cuts that the New York Times and Washington Post have described as one of the largest transfers of wealth from the middle class to the ultra-rich. The result? The U.S. now depends on printing money again, something economists from the Brookings Institution and the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities have long warned weakens the currency, increases instability, and reduces purchasing power, especially for the most vulnerable. Meanwhile, Trump shamelessly kneels before Saudi Arabia, begging for investments as if he were a bankrupt businessman trying to convince creditors for one more chance. And he does it with a smile, oblivious to the gravity of the problem or the national security impact. The Financial Times has already explained how Saudi investments are used for geopolitical influence, and Trump behaves exactly like the type of leader these regimes love: manipulable, approval-seeking, and desperate for quick cash. But when we dive into the internal data, the economic disaster becomes fully apparent. Trump's tariffs, those he called brilliant, started driving inflation precisely as economists predicted. American companies rushed to stockpile goods before the tariffs took effect, temporarily distorting numbers and creating a false sense of control. But now that inventories are depleted, the truth is visible. Inflation is rising again, and worse, it hits essential goods like food, severely impacting low-income families. The impact is being felt on all fronts. The increase in mortgage foreclosures, highlighted by independent analyses like Atom Data, is alarming. A 19% year-over-year rise means real families are losing their homes, a clear precursor to a recession. Always the case, according to studies cited by the Federal Reserve. Yet Trump continues to ignore this while boasting of a strong economy. Meanwhile, U.S. ports are in free fall. Empty containers, plunging cargo volumes, retailers bracing for the worst holiday season in a decade, just as warned by the National Retail Federation. And all because Trump's tariff policy not only failed, but created global chaos. The Wall Street Journal has shown the impact on supply chains, yet Trump keeps pretending he has created an economic revolution. And then comes the most embarrassing part.
the possibility that the Supreme Court may force the government to return around $150 billion in improperly collected tariffs. Imagine that. Trump threw the economy into chaos over an amount that doesn't even come close to the trillions he invents in speeches. This isn't incompetence, it's intellectual fraud. What's most outrageous is that while the middle class bleeds, the richest remain comfortable. Half of all national consumption comes from the top 10%, according to Moody's Analytics and widely cited CNBC analyses. This explains why corporate profits haven't collapsed. Trump calls this a strong economy. I call it a lie. And all of this, absolutely all of it, reveals one truth that Trump tries to hide. The U.S. is running out of revenue because his government has destroyed the basic pillars of state funding. Bankruptcies, unemployment cuts, families losing homes, declining federal and state revenues, complete neglect of the most vulnerable. This is his signature. What makes it even more dangerous is that while the economy shows clear signs of exhaustion, the Trump administration tries to mask the crisis by manipulating data, twisting interpretations, and perpetuating the illusion that everything is under control. But the Treasury numbers, along with independent analyses released by Bloomberg, the Congressional Budget Office, and renowned economists, tell a much darker story. The bond market is increasingly rejecting the U.S., demanding higher interest rates to cover the risk of Trumpian fiscal chaos, which means one simple thing: financing the country is becoming more expensive. Every Treasury auction reveals lower international confidence, lower risk appetite, and a growing perception that the U.S. has lost the economic credibility it built over decades.
And when we look at who is actually buying our debt, the picture becomes even scarier. Trump loves to claim that Japan trusts him, that China respects the U.S. again, or that the Cayman Islands are great international partners. But when we examine the data, both from the Treasury and deep Federal Reserve analyses, we see the trick. Much of this so-called foreign investment isn't foreign at all. It's our own hedge fund sending money to the Caymans to mask debt purchases and artificially inflate numbers. In other words, we're buying our own debt and pretending the world trusts us. This isn't strategy. It's institutional desperation. And Trump knows it. He knows so well that he tries to push the narrative of a strong economy with empty speeches and grand promises, all while hiding the fact that central banks, the true global players, are selling U.S. securities instead of buying. Reuters and the Financial Times have already shown this loss of confidence, and it has direct implications. When central banks sell U.S. debt, they are signaling that they do not trust the country's economic management. This distrust raises interest rates, increases risk, and adds instability, all under the supervision of a man who doesn't even understand basic fiscal balance sheets. Yet the most alarming part is that Trump doesn't respond by adjusting economic policy, reinforcing the Treasury, or rebuilding credibility. He reacts in the worst way possible, doubling down. He continues pushing massive deficits, cutting taxes for the wealthiest, and eroding the federal revenue base. This spend now, pretend stability later mindset was criticized by experts from the Brookings Institution and the Peterson Institute, precisely because it generates dangerous deficits in a context where demand for U.S. debt is falling. It's like pouring gasoline on an already burning fiscal fire. And when this scenario is combined with collapsing consumption, the situation becomes even more severe. Exploding personal bankruptcies, rising layoffs, shrinking incomes, rising living costs, all in a country where, as Moody's Analytics points out, half of consumption comes from a very small, wealthy minority that rarely suffers from economic crises. The middle class is losing homes, income, and stability, and Trump continues claiming that the economy has never been stronger. It's cruel, it's irresponsible, and it's completely detached from reality. Meanwhile, the American supply chain is imploding. Ports report historic declines. Companies reduce orders fearing tariffs, and millions of consumers face higher prices and lower supply, all because Trump used tariffs as a political weapon without understanding even the basic side effects.
The Wall Street Journal has already warned that Trump's tariff confusion created chaos that will take years to correct. Yet this government operates on short-term headlines, illusions, and appearances. And the bill always comes due for the people, never for the billionaires who financed his campaign. It gets worse when we look at official sources, foreign central banks. They no longer buy our securities as they used to. They are selling. They are divesting from U.S. debt because they do not trust the fiscal stability of a country led by someone who treats the Treasury as a tool for self-promotion. When central banks sell our debt, interest rates rise, borrowing becomes more expensive, and the government is left cornered, exactly what we're seeing now. That's why Trump is desperate for Saudi capital. That's why we see meetings, forced smiles, exaggerated praise, and strange deals that the Financial Times has publicly questioned. It's not diplomacy. It's not geopolitical strategy. It's financial desperation. The U.S. needs money because Trump destroyed domestic revenue-raising capacity and now depends on authoritarian regimes to keep the economy artificially breathing. And all of this raises a simple but essential question. How did a country of 330 million people, with the world's largest economy, come to rely on offshore hedge funds and Saudi political investments just to keep running? The answer is as obvious as it is uncomfortable. Trump turned the U.S. economy into a massive political pyramid scheme. He manipulates numbers, twists data, distorts statistics, and sells illusions while the internal structure collapses. In the end, the truth always comes out, and now it's clearer than ever. Trump leads a broken government, propped up by financial artifices, desperate improvisations, and decisions that put the country at risk to benefit the wealthy and protect his own failed economic genius narrative. And faced with all of this, it's impossible not to conclude the United States is not just facing a fiscal crisis, it's facing a moral crisis, caused by a leader who never cared about the population, but always cared about looking good on camera.
Trump's worst nightmare becomes reality. Swalwell reveals the information the president thought would never surface. And then it happened. The news nobody in Donald Trump's inner circle wanted him to hear. Precisely the news he feared most. Eric Swalwell, the congressman who confronted Trump head-on in Congress, helped lead his impeachment process and became one of the most relentless voices against MAGA authoritarianism, went live on Jimmy Kimmel and dropped the bombshell. He is running for governor of California, and that's not all. He made it clear that his candidacy has a direct purpose: to prevent Trump from using the state as a stage for his attacks, internal militarization, and politics of fear. And let me tell you, this hit exactly where it hurts Trump the most: a firm, organized challenge from someone who has never been intimidated by him. Swalwell didn't announce a candidacy, he announced a fight, a political wall, an entire state raised against Donald Trump's interference. And when he starts by saying, "California is the best place in the world," Trump feels the blow, because he knows what it means: autonomy, resistance, true independence, something Trump despises, because he only functions when he can intimidate. When he can't, he crumbles. And look, if anyone knows Trump from the inside, it's Swalwell. He's been there, in committees, in hearings, seeing what the media doesn't show. The real fear Trump feels when someone not only disagrees with him, but challenges him with facts, laws, and courage. That's what made Swalwell a priority on Trump's enemies list. And now, with a possible victory in California, Trump loses control over the largest state in the country, economically, culturally, and politically, the kind of blow that destroys the MAGA strength narrative. Here's my clear opinion. Trump knows he can't handle opponents like this. He gets along with sycophants, with people who bow down, with those who accept blackmail and intimidation. But when someone like Swalwell shows up, firm, prepared, articulate, willing to confront, and on top of that, popular in MAGA-opposed territory, Trump looks small, fragile, exposed. And this explains the desperate reaction we've seen ever since. Attacks, lies, distortions, all the childish behavior we already know. The impact is enormous. California is exactly the state Trump tried to dominate by force, with ICE raids,
federal troops, and economic threats. He attacked farmers, immigrants, universities, clean energy. Everything Swalwell says he will defend tooth and nail. It's the perfect narrative to turn into a political nightmare for Trump. An entire state saying, "You don't rule here." For a man obsessed with control, it's pure humiliation. Notice how Swalwell hits exactly the open wounds: unemployment, cost of living, internal militarization, cuts to healthcare, cuts to climate programs, cuts to cancer research, brutal deportations. Everything Trump tried to hide behind empty speeches about American greatness. That's why Trump fears this guy. It's not just opposition. It's a living reminder of everything Trump has destroyed. And honestly, it's been a long time since I've seen someone so prepared to dismantle Trumpist rhetoric with such clarity. Swalwell speaks on public safety with authority because he grew up in a police family, talks about immigration because he sees it firsthand in his own backyard, talks about the economy because governing a state as large as California is more complex than any cheap MAGA slogan, and talks about democracy because he confronted Trump inside the federal machinery itself. Trump can't stand that. Here's my final take. If this candidacy really gains traction, Trump will face his first major real obstacle even before the national election. Because California, led by someone who knows his tricks, isn't just opposition, it's containment, it's institutional resistance. It's a daily reminder that the country can thrive without Donald Trump controlling anything. And it doesn't stop there. Swalwell isn't just announcing his candidacy, he's declaring war on Trump's modus operandi. He makes it clear that California will no longer be a stage for MAGA experiments. ICE raids, cuts to education, attacks on cancer research, manipulation of public funds, and the narrative that the federal government decides who lives and dies in the wealthiest state. Trump, who has so far managed to intimidate smaller cities and districts under his control, now faces a politician who knows his weaknesses and isn't afraid to expose them. The most worrying aspect for Trump is the strategic reach of this candidacy. Swalwell isn't just targeting traditional Democratic voters. He knows victory depends on winning over independents and even conservatives dissatisfied with the president's chaotic style. He grows support in districts Trump thinks are secure. In areas like Kern County, Fresno, or Bakersfield, Swalwell is building bridges where other politicians see only walls. He speaks the language of real California, of communities that work hard, pay taxes, and see federal interference as a constant threat. And every vote gained there is a direct blow to the MAGA core, because Trump cannot handle opponents who cannot be bought or threatened. The narrative Swalwell builds is impeccable. He tells real stories, like that of Miguel Lopez, a citizen who worked, paid taxes, raised his kids, and was still ripped from his community by ICE. He humanizes Trump's attacks, turning politics into real urgency, showing the tangible impact of the MAGA administration on ordinary lives. For Trump, this is devastating. His populist rhetoric crumbles in the face of concrete examples that no one can deny. It's impossible for him to manipulate or distort facts when stories like this circulate in every diner, church, and school in California.
And if you think this is just a matter of local politics, you're mistaken. Swalwell also puts Trump under national pressure by committing to defending education, clean energy, medical research funding, and public health. He makes California a model of resistance. Every policy Trump tries to cut or weaken is immediately challenged by the state's next governor, showing the whole country that Trump's narrative of a stronger country under my command is in practice a lie. For a president who feeds on control and theatrics, this is more dangerous than any media attack. What Swalwell does is strategic, calculated, and uncomfortable. He doesn't promise just symbolic resistance. He promises action, justice, and results. He talks about housing, cost of living, AI and economic future, environmental sustainability, areas where Trump has always shown negligence or incapacity. And he does it in a way that resonates with everyone: Latinos, rural workers, independents, discontented conservatives. Every group Swalwell wins over is a direct blow to Trump's base, because he shows it's possible to govern without chaos, dishonesty, or arrogance. If you think Trump will ignore this, you're wrong. He feels it, he reacts, he fears it.
Because Swalwell represents something Trump has never faced before, an opponent who knows his game and knows how to beat him cleanly, legally, and with popular support. This is the news Trump feared most. It's not criticism, not a newspaper article, not a fleeting scandal. It's a candidacy that threatens to take control of the state Trump wanted to manipulate, use as a stage, and turn it into a showcase of his power. And for him, this is simply unacceptable.